Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and just like any other time, you know what it is. We have an amazing show lined for y'all today with special guests. Today, we have the true honor talking to Lauren Burns, and she has an amazing story that you need to not just appreciate, but to really learn about the ability to be resilient, to have faith, and to keep pushing despite what comes your way. She has a story that starts in her childhood. She was featured in the NBC movie Desperate Rescue, the Cathy Mahone Story. At the age of 7, she was kidnapped by her Jordanian father and taken to Jordan. Her mother hired ex-military personnel to rescue her. She is someone that you really need to appreciate her story. So first and foremost, I'm going to welcome you, Lauren, to the show and say, how are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. And I am honored to be able to share my story and be on your show.
I appreciate your time. I know your story leads up to you successfully being able to escape over a military secure border into Israel. But for our audience, kind of set up the framework. What was it like for you as a child to understand that you were taken away from your mother? And what were your emotions?
Sure. And, for the person listening, many of us have found ourselves in a place of fear and anxiety, maybe over a career or a marriage or a child that's gone wayward or an illness, you name it, fill in the blank, right? You don't have to have a child that was kidnapped like me to know what it's like to be in that place of fear and anxiety. But I hope as you listen to my story that you see that when you put your focus on Jesus and you step out in faith, that God can change everything, even in the impossible. My parents were divorced by the time I was 6 weeks old. They met in the Dallas area. My father is from Jordan and my mom is from Florida. And by the time I was 6 weeks old, they got divorced because my father wanted us to move to Jordan. He wanted me to be raised Muslim. He had that sense of being a father for the first time and wanting to instill all of those beliefs and that tradition into his only daughter. And after the divorce, I was the typical divorced kid going between two homes. Every other weekend, I'd go to my dad's house. He eventually remarried and had children. And then my mom had full custody of me. So the majority of the time, I was with my mom. I had a fantastic relationship with my father. He loved me. He was a loving father. He was a protective father. But everything changed in 1987 when I was 7 years old. It was Halloween weekend. He asked my mom if he could keep me for one extra day so I could go trick-or-treating with my siblings, and my mom didn't think anything of it. She was like, sure, no problem. Just make sure Lauren gets to school on Monday. Well, that day he came to pick me up Friday after school, and I had my bag, my suitcase ready. My Halloween costume was packed away, and I got in his car, and my siblings were not with him. My stepmother was not with him. It was just the two of us. And I started asking him, where's my brother? Where's my sister? And he said, well, I have a big surprise for you. We are not going trick-or-treating. We're actually going to the airport. I'm taking you on a big trip to see your family that you've never met. We're going to Jordan. Well, I start asking all the questions. I'm like, my mom never told me we were going to Jordan. She said that you're going to take me back to school Monday. I thought I was going trick-or-treating. And as he's driving to the airport and I continue to ask all the questions, he begins to get really frustrated and upset and angry. And I knew that I needed to stop asking questions because I was being that annoyed kid and my dad was getting angry. So that Monday, and my mom was a single mom at this point. I was her only child. And for the person listening that knows what it's like to be hustling all the time and working and trying to take care of a kid by yourself, you don't have time to stop your day to go have lunch with your kid in the middle of the day. It's hard to get them on time to pick them up from school, right? Well, God intervened. And on that Monday, my mom stopped everything and decided to go have lunch with me. That was totally out of her normal routine. She pulls up at the school. She gets to the courtyard. She's scanning as the kids are getting lined up to go to the cafeteria, and she doesn't see me. And the teacher comes over and sees the concern on my mom's face and was like, hey, Cathy, Lauren never came to school today. Her dad never brought her. Well, my mom was mad, right? That's the last thing she said. Make sure she gets to school. So this is in the 80s. There's no cell phone. So she goes to the payphone and she calls my dad's house and no one answers. Then she called his restaurant. He owned a restaurant in the Dallas area. And they told my mom that my dad never showed up for work. Well, that anger became fear. Those red flags, or the Holy Spirit, started talking to my mom right then. That third phone call from that payphone, my mom called the Alia Royal Airlines. The headquarters was in New York City. She remembered that was the main airlines that went into Jordan because she had gone to Jordan before they got married. And she called, and when the lady answered, she said, "Do you have a Lauren and a Cathy on your flight reservation?" Well, the woman told her, "Ma'am, we can't give out that kind of information." And my mom said, "Please, I think my ex-husband has taken my daughter. Can you please help me?" She came back on the line and she said, "Yes, ma'am. I have a Lauren and a Ollie arriving in Amman, Jordan this evening." That was the moment that my mom knew my dad had taken me. Her fourth phone call from that payphone was to the Lamberts, Beverly and Rick Lambert. If you know that last name, Miranda Lambert, the famous country singer-songwriter. They were my mom's best friends. They're still very close to us today. Bev and Rick had a private investigation company called Lambert and Lambert, and they knew my father very well. They knew me and my mom very well. So my mom paged Rick 911, and Rick and Bev were actually at the courthouse that day working together when he got the page, and he called my mom from the clerk's office, and my mom began to tell him, "Rick, Ollie's taken Lauren. I don't know what to do." Rick and Bev got in their car and they're driving 100 miles an hour down the Dallas Expressway. I actually have interviewed them on my podcast, and listening to them retell this story, we sit there and cry on the couch while they're telling it because it's hard and emotional. They got to the townhouse and everything started to unfold in that townhome. Rick told my mom, "Go to Radio Shack, put a cassette player recorder on the phone. So every time you try to call Jordan, you try to talk to Ollie or any of his family, you try to talk to the police, we can go back and listen to the recordings to remember what the conversation was going on, because your mind's going to be all over the place." Well, thank God for Rick, because I still have those cassette tapes. I've listened to them. They are hard to listen to. I share them on my podcast because I'm in the middle of writing a book, so it's been helpful to go back through and listen to that. But my mom literally every day calling Jordan, talking to whoever would answer the phone, begging, "Please, I'm Lauren's mother. You have to bring Lauren back. This isn't fair. I won't prosecute Ollie. Ollie won't get in trouble. Just come back to the United States." And most of the time, people couldn't speak English. It was very broken Arabic and English. And my mom's crying and begging. And they just keep saying, "No Ollie here, no Lauren here. We can't help you." Then she started calling the police. And Rick was making all the phone calls of people he knew. And everyone kept saying, "We can't help you. Yes, you have full custody of your daughter in the United States, but your ex-husband is a Jordanian citizen. We can't help you. It's out of our jurisdiction." So you can imagine the fear and the anxiety in that townhouse. My mom's not eating. She's not sleeping day after day. There is no hope. People are telling her, "You're not going to see your daughter again." And one day, so Bev and Rick and Miranda, they had moved in with my mom at this point. They were staying with her day and night, trying to help her. And I really feel like God wanted me to hear this conversation all these years later, because I have the recording of this phone call. Beverly calls my mom. My mom answers, and Beverly said, "Cathy, you have got to get away from all the noise and the chaos, and you have got to get alone with Jesus, and you have got to pray, because this isn't working." And my mom starts crying, and she's like, "You're right. Will you pray protection over Lauren, no matter if she's in the mosque or if she's in the streets of Jerash, that God would protect her?" And Beverly starts praying over me. And then Beverly told my mom, "I remember reading a book that talked about fasting and how fasting brings you the closest to God." And my mom just is crying on the phone. And she said, "You're right. I've got to get away from all the noise and the chaos, and I have to stop smoking these cigarettes." My mom had smoked since she was little, but at this point, she told me she was smoking like 2 cigarettes at a time all day long because she was stressed out of her mind, right? She was running to those cigarettes instead of running to Jesus. And if you're listening, cigarettes are not going to make you go to hell. It's just, that was her stress reliever. So my mom agreed and said, I need to get away. I need to fast and pray. But before she could do that, Rick Lambert had made an appointment with the grand jury in Dallas for her to go and try to get a warrant out for my dad's arrest. They thought if my dad tried to come back to the United States, they could at least put him in jail and figure out where I was. So Rick drove her to the courthouse that day and reminded my mom, Cathy, they're probably not going to be able to help you, but this is just a part, going through the paperwork, going through the routines. And my mom's like, I'll do whatever it takes. So she goes into the meeting and she stands before the jury and she begins to tell them what had happened, that she had full custody of me. My father was a Jordanian citizen and he had taken me. And they told her the same thing, ma'am, we're so sorry. We hear about these things pretty often, but the United States does not have a treaty with Jordan, so therefore we cannot help you. And that's when my mom sort of broke and her guard came down and she started saying, hey, can I be real with you? It's not fair that we spend billions of dollars in foreign aid every year and you're telling me there's nothing you can do to help me get my daughter back. Well, they all agreed with her. You have this mom that's sobbing. What are you going to do? So one man stood up. His name is Al Zapanta. Al still works in the political world. He's high in the military, has a lot of military awards. My mom had no clue who he was at the time. He opens his wallet and said, I work for the State Department. Here's my business card. If you're not happy with the State Department, give me a call. I'll see what I can do. Well, when you are in the middle of anxiety and fear and depression, you can't even see the light in the darkness. So she put that card in her wallet. She walked out and Rick was like, hey, how did it go? And she was like, they can't help me. And you could just see the fear all over her. She got back in the car and they drove back to the townhouse and she walked in and Beverly was like, are you okay, Cathy? And she's like, they can't help me. They said they can do nothing to help me get Lauren back. So she went and she got her bag that was already packed and she grabbed her Bible and she told Bev and Rick, I don't know where I'm going, but I need to be alone. I'm going to go and be alone and pray. And Beverly said, don't worry, we will handle it. If Ollie calls, we will screen the phones. We will take care of things. We will notify you if anything changes. So she got in the car and she drove towards Fort Worth, not knowing where she was going. She found some motel room and she booked a room and stayed there for 3 days and 3 nights. And she just prayed and she read her Bible and prayed and just drinking water. On that 3rd day, she had her Bible in her hands and God gave her the scripture, Daniel 10:12. And in the scripture, Daniel had been praying and fasting for 21 days, praying over the Israelites. And the angel Gabriel came to Daniel and he said, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. God was saying, Cathy, I see you. From the moment you took your eyes off the situation and you came and you prayed and you got into the word, I see you. But just like in Daniel, just like the angel Gabriel, if you keep reading, it talks about, it took me 21 days to come and talk to you because there's a war in the heavenlies over the Israelites. And God was telling Cathy, there's a war in the heavenlies over your daughter. And so you keep praying and stay steadfast and I'm going to see you through this. And then God told my mom, you need to lay down those cigarettes. Stop running to that idol and that distraction or that thorn in your side, and you run to me. And any areas of bitterness or anger or unforgiveness, you got to lay it down because the prayers of the righteous, those prayers are honored. And if you got that bitterness and unforgiveness built up in your heart, it's going to block those prayers. So my mom started wrestling with God and laying all that stuff down. She walked out of that motel room, went back to the townhouse, and Beverly opened the door and said, you don't look the same, Cathy. Something has changed. My mom said, I'm not the same. God spoke to me. He gave me scripture. I know I'm going to see my daughter again. Everything in my story changed after that. My mom got that card out. She called Al. Al begins to tell my mom, 1 week prior to him being at that jury duty, that grand jury, he was in Washington, D.C. having lunch with his friend, Everett Alvarez. Mr. Alvarez was the second longest held POW. He was held for 8.5 years. He has many, many military awards. Many people in the military know that name. They were longtime friends, and they were having lunch, and Everett was telling Al about a group of men by the name that had a company called CTU. And their mission was to go to the Middle East and rescue hostages, American citizens that had been taken. And it's no mistake that Al happened to be in that jury room and happened to have this information when he came across my mom. My mom was beside herself, and she said, I have to meet these men. I need to get connected with them. And Al was like, slow down, Cathy. They've never rescued a child. It's going to cost a lot of money. They're no longer with the military. They were ex-Delta Force, Green Beret. And she said, I don't care. I want to meet these men. So she flew Dave and Dawn into Dallas, and they met with my mom. My mom showed up at the meeting with pictures of me, pictures of my dad, maps of the city, maps of my father's home. She was prepared, and they were blown away by how confident and how prepared she was. And they told her, they said, look, we've never rescued a child. We cannot guarantee your protection or her protection. And if this rescue mission goes south, the United States is not going to help us. My mom said, I don't care, whatever it takes. So they agreed. They said yes to the mission. And they began putting together a plan to go to Jordan and to get me back. During that time, I had been gone for 3 months. My father said I was going on a vacation to meet my family. I'd never been to Jordan. I'd never spoken Arabic. That was a whole new world for me, new customs, a different God. I was going to the mosque and I was worshiping Allah. I didn't know. I thought I was talking to Jesus in a different language. I was, there was the toilet was a hole in the ground. It wasn't a regular toilet. They didn't have toilet paper. They cleaned themselves using their hand. It was total culture shock for a 7-year-old. And every time I asked when would I talk to my mom? Can I talk to my mom? Can I see my mom? My dad would become more and more angry. And also his role with me was very different. In Jordan, it wasn't his job to take care of me. I was taken care of by my aunts and my grandmother that I really didn't know. He wasn't really allowed to be with me because I was a child, and the roles there are very, very different. I even noticed at 7. So I was going through a lot of trauma myself, not knowing if I'd ever see my mom again. My mom went to Washington, D.C. Her job was to try to get a passport for me, visa, entry stamps to get me out of the country, because of course she didn't have a passport for me. And then Dave went to try to find an escape route. How do you get me out of there? He went to Syria and realized Syria was an absolute war zone, too dangerous to try to go that direction. He went towards Aqaba. He thought he could swim me across from Jordan to Israel. There's a body of water. And once he got there, it was so heavily guarded by military, he thought there's no way he could do that. So the safest route was a border called the Allenby Bridge between Jordan and Israel, literally going over the Jordan River. Like, how symbolic is that, right? So he found an escape route, which is a whole nother story. You can hear all the details because I get to interview him too. It's so cool. But then they had to find me, and they had to make sure I was even in Jordan, because I thought, what if I'm in Lebanon with other family? And they had to find my dad's house. So Dave was there for several weeks and couldn't find me. And so he called Dawn and JD and said, y'all got to come in and help me. So Dawn and JD were there for many days, searching everywhere, could not find me. They had photos of me. I have olive complexion skin. I have dark hair, but I have bright blue eyes. So that was sort of that standout feature to try to locate me. And one day, JD and Dawn are standing on the street a couple feet from one another. And at this point, JD just starts praying. He's like, okay, God, I've done all the things I know how to do. You got to help us find this little girl. And a few moments later, a school bus pulls up right where JD was standing. And he said he turned and he looked through that window, and there I sat, staring eye to eye. And he just was filled with emotion. He ran over to Dawn. He shook Dawn by the shoulders and was like, I saw Lauren. And Dawn was like, what do you mean? How do you know? And JD's like, I saw her. I saw her eyes. I know it was her. Well, by that time, the bus had driven off, so they couldn't follow it. But they radioed Dave, and then Dave called my mom. My mom was in Cyprus by this time, waiting for the news that they had found me. And so they said, Cathy, we know Lauren's in Jerash, but we need you to come and help us find your ex-husband's home. We can't find it. So my mom flew into Amman. They drove Dawn and JD drove my mom into Jerash, and my mom was super confident, thinking she could find it easily, that she would remember. Well, as she starts driving in, that fear started to overwhelm her again. Nothing looked the same. The dirt roads were now paved. The small little buildings were now big. So she got down on the floorboard, started praying and crying out loud with her eyes closed, even if the guys thought she was crazy. And she said it's like the Holy Spirit started to show her exactly where to go. And she would tell them, turn left, go straight, turn right, without ever looking up. And then finally she looked out her window and she saw my dad's car with Texas license plates on it. And then she was able to finally say, Dawn, I saw his car. Well, Dawn said, Cathy, hide your face. I'm going to turn the car around. So he turned the car around, and when he drove past, he saw my dad walk out of the building. And so they finally had located my father and the home. But again, nothing happened until people started praying. So the goal was to rescue me from the school bus because the house was in the middle of the city in a busy area. So they decided to hijack the bus. And on the day of the mission, the code word was the sun is shining, but not S-U-N. The sun is S-O-N. The sun is Jesus. So even the code word, my mom was like, yes, the sun is shining. Dave was in one car. JD and Dawn and my mom were in another car. As soon as they saw me get on the bus, Dave drove over and told them. And then as the bus passed Dawn and JD's car, they zoomed and they blocked the bus, so the bus couldn't get out. Dawn got out of the car and went over to the bus driver and started speaking English to distract him. Dave went over and pried open the passenger door, and my mom went over. And I remember this day like it was yesterday. Her hair was covered in disguise. She went over and tapped on the window and stared right at me, motioning for me to get off the bus. And I froze. All I could think of is it looks just like my mom, but how can it be? My mom's in Texas. So my mom had to get on the bus, pushing past all the kids. She scooped me up in her arms. As she's getting me off the bus, the lady chaperone jumped on her back, and my mom had to punch her in the nose. And now this lady's bleeding, and so I'm totally freaking out. They put me in the floorboard and they cover me with blankets to hide me, and we drive off. 2 blocks down the road, we switched cars with Dave so no one would recognize the car we were in, the car that we used to hijack the bus. Dave took that car and drove back towards the city to be a decoy. Dave eventually got pulled over, and that's a whole nother story of how he got out safely. They shut down the whole airport looking for me. All of the military, all of the police were looking for me at the Amman airport while we were driving towards Israel. The day of the mission, the fog was so thick that all you could see was the front of the car. It was a 45-minute drive. And in the distance, the only thing you could see, my mom was like, what is that bright light? And Dawn said, well, Cathy, the sun is shining over Israel. Even that, the sun was shining over Israel in all of the darkness. The border crossing, once we got to the border, we had to leave our car, get out, give all of the paperwork at the border, make sure that it was all legit paperwork, got back on the bus. As the bus is driving, the midpoint of that bridge, the Israeli bus driver, they switch with the Jordanian bus driver, and the Israeli bus driver takes us on over into Israel. Right as that's happening, there was a big commotion behind us. They just realized I wasn't at the airport, but I was on that bus. But it was too late. We had gotten into Israel, and there's nothing they could do. So God brought me out of Jordan back to the United States with my mom.
That's a powerful story. As you're telling it, I'm literally watching a movie. It's so detailed, and it feels like something that you watch on some movie or Netflix or something, because the amount of detail that you just shared for our audience is amazing. How much faith your mom had to have, because it was blind, from the outside, not knowing your status, not knowing if you were okay or not for a long period of time. And for you, I know we are getting close, but if you can share with the audience, what was, I know you're only 7, but that's a long time not being with your mom. Were there times where you were able to ask, or were you trying to ask questions around you, like, where's mom? Or were you just kind of like reserved and quiet? What was your experience in that part?
It was a little bit of both. I have a podcast called Redeemed where I share some of these cassette tapes. They're very emotional and hard to listen to, but I had one of those conversations the first time I was able to talk to my mom. And you can hear my voice is already different. I'm speaking Arabic. When she got me, I was only speaking Arabic. And so there was a lot of fear. And then coming out of that, so much anger towards my father, those father wounds, deep father wounds I had to heal from, of the person that's supposed to protect me and keep me safe and for me to trust took me from everything I ever knew. And so there was a lot of healing. We had to change our last names. We had to live in hiding. And then those fears, that time being there was traumatic. That I went through some things. There was good times too, but there was some traumatic things that I went through. I didn't want to use the bathroom, so I kept wetting myself and having accidents. And my dad put a diaper on me at 7 to embarrass me. Different things occurred, but God is so good to bring so much healing and redemption. That's why I call the podcast Redeemed, because no matter what circumstance we go through in life, God can heal those broken pieces.
And with that said, you are watching I Am Refocused Radio and listen to us talking to our special guest today, Lauren Burns. You go to her website, laurenburns.net. Amazing story. I just let you run with it because I said, you know what? This is like I'm watching a movie right now. I'm not going to stop and have a commercial break. But in wrapping this up, when you look at what you had to go through separately, what your mom had to go through, what was it like finally being able to reconnect with her? And what was it that you believe she was trying to focus you on, understanding that you're still young and there might be some things that you're still like trying to figure out as a young child?
Well, I slept with her till I was 12 years old. There was a lot of fear. And my mom just let me. She was like, yes, you just spend all the time. Because at night is when we would open up and I'd have all the hard conversations and we would sift through what happened while I was in Jordan. But the biggest thing she taught me was forgiveness. She showed me how to forgive my father. She never badmouthed my dad, even after what she went through. She actually allowed me to see him, write letters to him, talk to him on the phone. When I graduated high school, she invited him to my high school graduation in East Texas from Lindale, where Miranda grew up. I lived with them for a while, and welcomed him into our home and cooked a meal. So she demonstrated forgiveness, and forgiveness is what has brought so much healing in my life.
That's powerful. I was not expecting that part of the story. My last question for you before we officially wrap this up is, knowing that fact about your mom not just leading you by example, I mean, faith is a clear foundation for your family. Mm-hmm. When she gave that much access to your father, my curiousness will be for our audience, our viewers, what was the relationship like with your father? Was he kind of in the family a little bit, or were they distant? What was that like? Because that's a very powerful moment for your mom to have him see you as you got older and not have any grudges.
It was very hard. It was a lot of letters back and forth, a lot of tears, a lot of emotions, very difficult. I did not want to talk to my dad. But my mom did not want me to regret not knowing who he was. So I know she did the right thing, but it was hard for both of us. We both cried together. So much fear. When I heard his voice on the phone, my heart would race. I met him for the first time in a public area, the Galleria Mall in Dallas. We changed our license plates, so in case he followed us, He would think we still lived in Florida. I mean, it was very tense. Then into my high school years, that fear was finally gone. And I went to visit him, not in Jordan, but back in the United States. And so I got to meet my siblings and my stepmother. It was hard, but it was healing. But it never really healed my relationship with him because he never truly could accept what he did. He never even told my siblings what he did. So I really feel like that's why our relationship, I don't want people to think that you tie up everything with a pretty red bow, because that's not true. We don't have a relationship now. But because of forgiveness, I can let the anger go. And I told my father on the phone about 5 years ago, I forgive you for what you did because I believe in Jesus and Jesus forgives me of my sins. So who am I to hold a grudge against you, you know? So that's just freedom for me, even though the relationship's not restored.
Once again, you listen to I Am Refocused Radio and watching us online. Talk to our guest today, Lauren Burns. Go to our website, laurenburns.net. There's probably like 10,000 other questions I would want to ask you, but for the sake of time,
Hey, we'll do it again.
you guys have you on, because my burning question next will be, did your father tell you personally why he made those decisions years ago? Because I will be interested to know if he shared his side of the story of what was going through his mind.
I don't think he could really truly ever answer. The way he answered it was, because I loved you. That sounds nice. That's easy to say, but it doesn't answer all the hurt. And so many people can relate to this too. If we just think about divorce alone, the action of one person affects so many. That action of adultery, it affects so many. And the action of my father taking me, it affected my siblings, my stepmother, my mother, so many people, so many years. But God can redeem all of that, even though it's hard and it hurts. And I know that my dad knows he made a mistake, but he could never really admit to that, because in his eyes, he was doing the right thing. He wanted me to believe in Allah. He wanted me to live the life of the culture of Jordan. And so in his mind, he was doing what was right. And so I think that's why he really couldn't ever tell me. And let's be honest, sometimes we're looking for answers here on earth that only God can give us. My dad couldn't tell me the right things that was going to heal my heart, but my heavenly Father, he can give me those answers.
Wow. It's an understatement to say that this is a very fascinating story. Wow. I'm just like, wow, this is true honor to have you on the show, because
Thank you.
This is one of a kind of a story to explore and to be shared. So I'm glad you're sharing it with the world, and I can't wait to have you on in the future just to catch up on what you're doing, because like I said in the very beginning, this feels like a movie just being played as you were talking. And all I can say is, wow, amazing story. Very awesome testimony on faith. I can't imagine what was going through your mom's, going through her mind, because not knowing if your child is okay. But when you look at all the pieces that were in the story, all the people that she was led to, the parts where she had a glimpse of hope, but you still weren't known if you were okay or not. But she was hold on to different points, mile markers in the story where it's like, trust the process. It's going to be okay. She's going to, from the very point of the moment where they see you on the bus sitting down, like, wow. Only
we don't know. And in the middle of the stuff we're going through, we don't know, but God does. He's like, trust me, I got it all under control. But in the moment, oh my gosh, our mind is all over the place. And that's why I'm sharing my story now. Because if you watch the movie, it's a good movie, but you're not going to talk about prayer. You're not going to see the faith of God. You're not going to hear all the God moments, because NBC didn't talk about that. But I'm changing that. That's why I'm sharing the story. And that's why I'm writing a book. I want God to get the glory. That's what the point of the story is.
And I like that you mentioned your book that you're working on. Again, for our audience, our viewers, do you have a date in mind, maybe a ballpark when you might be releasing this, or would they have to go to laurenburns.net for updates?
You're going to have to go to the website because I'm in the middle of it. I've got an editor and I work full time as a physical therapist. So this whole book thing is new to me, but it's going to happen. It'd be great if it was 2025. Let's just pray that that's what's going to happen. 2025.
Well, that's a great teaser because I'm going to have to officially have you on when the book is published. So we'll have to make that happen. So once again, been listening to I Am Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Lauren Burns. Go to her website, laurenburns.net. Amazing, powerful story. It was a great honor having you on. Like always, Lauren, I want to say thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.